Your eyes do not deceive you. This is a finished Moby sweater. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing a box standard knitting podcast episode where I talk about my finished objects, my works in progress and my future plans and acquisitions. If you're new here, my name is Juliette and I'm a very avid knitter. I learned how to knit when I was 5 years old, but I've only started garment knitting about 3 years ago now. So let's jump right into today's episode. So the big one today, and the one finished object I have to talk about, is this Moby sweater. If you have been following me since like the early episodes of this podcast series, you know that this jumper actually predates my channel in the sense that I started it January 2023. Honestly, I'm being quite delusional today by wearing this jumper because, it's 18 degrees and 18 degrees is borderline too warm to be wearing pure Norwegian wool like this. But I just had to because it's fresh off the bocking mats and I'm so happy with it. The yarn that I used for this is Sandnesgarn Pyrgen, which I have a bit of leftover. So this is the yarn. It's Sandnesgarn Pyrgen, which is a pure Norwegian wool yarn, and it's got 95 meters for 50 grams. It's a very popular yarn for anything that's to do with cables and textures and whatnot, and I can really see why, because the stitch definition on this is lovely. It's quite scratchy in my opinion. It's not itchy though, and I think there's a bit of a difference between itchy and scratchy. For example, I find alpaca itchy, but it's soft, and scratchy is the opposite of soft. But itchy is like on a different scale. So this yarn for me falls on the scratchy but not itchy category, at least from my experience of wearing this jumper all of today in like a slightly too warm condition. I feel like if the weather was colder, it wouldn't be as uncomfortable. I'm not saying it's uncomfortable. Honestly, I'm fine. I can wear this jumper, no problem. I have more hesitation wearing stuff that contains alpaca than I have this, for example. If you have sensitive skin, I'm not too sure Pyrgen might be the best choice for you. They do also say that Pyrgen tends to soften over time because it is supposed to be like a kind of an indestructible heirloom type of wool where you can really keep it for a few generations apparently. Yeah, it's quite a durable yarn, I've been told. So I'm hoping that over time this kind of softens and relaxes, the fiber just relax a bit and it becomes, even more lovely and comfortable. But this is already amazing as it is. So let's do a big recap of everything that I've done differently on this pattern. First of all, you might notice that this jumper looks quite big on me, and that's because I purposefully went 2 sizes up. I knit a size L when I would usually be a size S to get a lot more ease than the pattern recommends. So I think the pattern recommends around 10 to 15 centimeters of positive ease, and I went for more like 30. So size L comes up to 118 centimeters and I'm a 89 centimeter bust. So yeah, it's literally 29 centimeters of positive ease. And I'm super pleased with this. I think it was the right call because my vision for it was very much like a big oversized jumper. Right now, you can't see it on camera, but it hits just below my hip bone. So it's like not cropped, but not like a super long length either. So it has like a very lovely boxy fit, which I really enjoy about my jumpers. That's what I've noticed measuring up. I measured some of my store-bought jumpers that I really like the fit of, kind of took an audit of my closet and realized this is the sort of measurements that I really enjoy wearing. And so therefore I should try to emulate that in my knitting as well. So that's what I've done here. Super happy about it. So this is size L. That should have been a size S normally, but I sized up 2 sizes to get 30 centimeters of positive ease. I chose my own body length just based on what I preferred. And another modification is that I did slightly flashing the t-shirt underneath. I did the ribbing a lot shorter on the bottom of the body. So I think the ribbing in the pattern is supposed to be like 10 centimeters long, and I did it about only 5 centimeters because I kind of preferred the look of a shorter ribbing band on the body. But for the sleeves, I did kind of make it a bit longer. I think I did it for about 20 rows, so it was roughly 8 centimeters or something like that. And you can also see that I make the sleeves quite long, and I'm like kind of having to roll them up. Honestly, I'd much rather that than sleeves that are too short. I've had the experience of knitting a jumper that had sleeves that were just too short, and like now I'm having to redo those sleeves, and I still haven't gotten around to that. So yeah, I'd much rather have sleeves that are too long, and I could just roll them up like this, and I really like this look as well. Another thing I did kind of in my own guidance and stuff is the sleeve pickup. So basically, following the pickup rate for the sleeve, I ended up with more stitches than the pattern recommended for this size. So instead of trying to cut down a number of stitches that I had picked up and potentially have this issue where I have too few stitches for this armhole and things look a bit like tight around the armhole here, instead I just looked at the number of stitches I ended up with, and it matched with a few sizes up's stitch counts for their sleeves. So I was like, okay, that means I could just follow that sleeve's instruction for knitting up this sleeve. So I think, yeah, I ended up with, I don't know, 92 stitches or something like that. I can't remember exactly. I think I put it down in my Ravelry notes. And then I did my own version of the decrease rates. So I did a decrease every 8 rounds, 13 times. And then a tiny bit more on here before I did the cuffs for 8 centimeters. These are all the mods that I did for this pattern, and I'm really, really pleased with it. I mean, it's so nice. I love this cozy look. This is exactly what I had envisioned in my mind of how this jumper should look. And I'm really in love with cables. This is actually my first ever cabled jumper pattern that I've knitted up. I have to say, in terms of the Moby Sweater pattern itself, the cabling pattern was really easy to remember. And so after like maybe this much of the back, because it's knit top down, you start with the back and then you do the front panels and then the body and the sleeves. When you start off with the back, after like maybe 10 centimeters of knitting up the back piece, I felt like I had already memorized the pattern, and especially with Purgin having such a good stitch definition, it was also really easy to read the stitches, so you kind of figure out where you're at in terms of the pattern repeat. And also, when you're knitting flat, when doing the back and the front panels, or the yoke before you join the body in the round, all the cables, like all the things where you have to twist stuff or do this cable stuff or twist the stitches for the lattice here, they're all done on the right side. So that's an easy way of remembering as well the pattern repeat for the cables. And you have this garter stitch here, which once you're in the round, you do 1 row knit, 1 row purl. So then that's also a really good way of remembering whether you're on an even or odd row, and therefore remember, I think it's on the even, or it's on one of the rows that you have to do the cables. So when you transition to going into the round and you no longer have the right and wrong side to kind of tell you when you're supposed to do these cable twists or whatever, you can use the garter stitch as a guide for when you are on the odd or even round and whichever it was that you had to do the cable twist on. So all to say that I think honestly it's a very easy pattern, and I know a lot of people say that the Ingrid sweater by Petite Knit is a good one for starting out in terms of cables and textures and knitting, because you kind of move on pattern to pattern, so you don't have to like memorize this whole thing. But I actually think that this was really relatively quick to memorize, and also you only need to learn like these 2 patterns, right? The lattice and the cable braid here. There are also no short rows, whereas the Ingrid sweater is notorious for having quite a lot of short rows, I believe, for the sleeve. So the sleeves are just like kind of straight, and you have just the decreases underneath to kind of make a shape, but there's no short rows whatsoever for shaping this bit, basically. The only short row shaping that you do is for doing the European shoulder construction, where you basically, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong because it's been a long time, like as I said, I cast this on in January 2023. No, January 2024, sorry. So I believe the way you cast on is that you cast on the whole back width, but then you do short rows to shape the slope here in pattern. I think that's the only short row that you need to do, and that's a pretty easy one because it's quite intuitive to understand that you're doing these short rows to make a sloped shape for the back. So yeah, overall, I think this pattern was a great beginner-friendly cable pattern. Petite knits pattern writing style is always a favorite of mine because it's very to the point, but also gives you enough instructions on to make you really understand where you're at in the pattern process. So overall, a super positive experience. Now, the only negative that I have with this jumper at the moment is actually my own fault completely. So basically, when I was done with this jumper, I blocked it in my usual wool blocking bucket that I have for my knits, and I then tried to put it in the spin cycle in my washing machine. I did this for when I blocked just the body as well. But what I didn't realize when I blocked just the body and the first sleeve that I finished is that my spin cycle actually has an agitation mode at the very beginning, where it kind of just like does a few tumbles of whatever is inside before it actually does the spinning at 1,400 rounds per minute or whatever. And so that agitation alone was enough to actually slightly felt the kind of top layer of my knitting. And so it hasn't like shrunk it or anything. It hasn't made it unwearable at all. This is absolutely fine at the moment. It has just made it a teeny tiny bit fuzzy and kind of fused the stitches together ever so slightly. So if you compare this to people who also use Peer Gynt, who have freshly blocked them, I assume in the correct way, you can kind of see that it doesn't look as fuzzy and the stitches don't look as kind of melted together or fused together as this does. I think this just makes it look a bit more worn already than it would have been fresh off the blocking mats for a freshly cast off project. I think the fuzziness of these stitches is kind of the look that the jumper will eventually have in like a few years after like a decent amount of wear. So I'm not too mad about it. It is a learning process. I kind of thought that the Peer Gynt was a bit indestructible, so it would be fine in the washing machine and so on. And I kind of forgot that I haven't really used spin cycle in this new washing machine that I have because I recently moved house. I've only ever used the wool cycle, which I think definitely does not include an agitation process. And so I've washed my old knits in the wool cycle, no problem whatsoever. But I think now that I remember, this is my first time only just using the spin cycle, and it just wasn't a good idea for this jumper. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think it actually looks like something happened to it, or do you think like I'm being a bit dramatic and this is absolutely fine? I think if I said to someone that knows knitting and yarn that this is what happened, they'll be like, oh yeah, I can see that. But I feel like if I didn't mention anything, no one would be able to tell that I made this sort of mistake. So that's the only kind of negative about this project. That and the fact that I took way too much time to complete this. It's kind of silly because the sleeves only took like a week each to knit up. I forgot to mention that I remember last time I mentioned about how I had an issue with the sleeve kind of twisting on itself. Part of it was because I was doing the incorrect leaning decreases for the purl decreases. And so I fixed that. And last time I had shown this project, I had already started re-knitting that first sleeve after realizing that mistake. But I still noticed that the twisting was happening, and I mentioned that it was probably just a natural bias that happens with knitting textured stuff, because you're knitting it in the round, so you're always going in one direction, so that kind of creates a twisted look. You can see that there's absolutely none of that happening right now because it just fixed itself with blocking. I think the blocking just made sure that everything was, relaxed, and once I pinned it out in shape and just made it laid out flat, then it was absolutely fine. So it was, I didn't have to worry about that too much in the end. But it's a good thing to know. And someone else messaged me on Instagram saying that they were having a similar problem with the Dagmar jacket, which has a seed stitch. This is moss stitch, which is like a double seed stitch. But anyway, it's kind of a similar thing where you have a texture. And so they were also experiencing this twisting. And so I've kind of replied to them saying, I think it's going to be okay with blocking. So yeah, that's the Moby sweater. I'm honestly so happy that this is done, and I cannot wait to do more textured cable jumpers. I think that's gonna start becoming my thing. I say this having finished just one after it took me a year and 9 months, so I may have to just calm myself down. If you look at my Ravelry queue, if you're curious, a lot of the stuff that I plan to knit for the upcoming future does feature a lot of cables and textures. Actually, let me know if you would be interested in like an autumn winter knitting plan video. I have a large stash, and I intend to only knit from stash at the moment, also because I'm trying to save a bit of money. Yeah, I have a lot of plans that I had at the beginning of the year that just haven't started, and so I'm like hoping that now that I've finished these big projects that have been lingering in my pile of works in progress, now I'll be able to move on to those more new and exciting projects. So yeah, let me know if you want to see a plans video. Okay, so let's move on to works in progress. The first one is my porcelain sweater. I mean, it's looking super cute. I think last time I had shown it with the body all finished, and I had blocked it to do just like a mid-project block, because I've been really enjoying doing that. It gives a boost of dopamine and a boost of motivation to finish up a project like this once you know that the body is done, and blocking it makes it so beautiful as well. The small update is that I picked up the sleeves yesterday after having finished this, and I've already finished, or almost finished at least, the first color work chart of this sleeve, which is the one that I enjoyed the least of these 3 patterns. So I'm glad that like I got through this one quite quickly. Obviously it's because you have a lot less stitches on the sleeve than you do on the body, so I was quite surprised at how quickly I was able to do this. I started this last night and I knitted on it for a couple hours. I knit on it today during my lunch break for like maybe an hour and a half or something, and yeah, I'm already towards the end of this color work chart. So yeah, it's looking so beautiful right now. I'm very excited. I am setting myself the challenge that I will finish this jumper in 2 weeks' time. So hopefully in my next podcast episode in 2 weeks from now, I'll have a finished porcelain sweater. We'll see. That's my hope. I did the same thing that I did with the stitch pickup thing as I did with this Moby sweater, where basically I just followed the pickup rate that was recommended for this pattern, which is 3 stitches every 4 rows. On the armhole here, and I ended up with a certain number of stitches which matched a different sizes stitch count. I'm knitting size M, but I ended up getting a stitch count that matched size XL to XL. I mean, this is just probably due to difference in row gauge, and a row gauge difference is not too important in my opinion. Anyway, so I ended up I think with 92 stitches, so I decided to just follow the instructions of that size to make sure that I'm working the sleeve correctly. And yeah, it's looking super cute. Oh, another reason why I probably have more stitches on the armhole than my size should have is because I did a couple extra rows in between these color work patterns just to have them spaced out a bit more throughout the body. And I think that was a great idea because I feel like compared to my first porcelain sweater, I don't have nearly as much white space here before I move on to the body ribbing to make the right body length. So spacing them out like this meant that as soon as I was finished with the third color work, I was already very close to the body length that I wanted. So the ribbing is just like filling that gap, and this width of color, no color work, kind of matches this width, and so I quite like that it's kind of kept coherent like that. And so that's why I probably have like an extra 6 stitches compared to what I should have for the armhole. So yeah, that roughly matches what I'm getting versus what I was supposed to have. So yeah, hopefully I finish this in 2 weeks. Knock on wood. I'm going to my parents' place, and so I think it will be a lot more chill time, downtime when I'm there, so I can get a lot of knitting done before or after PhD work. So yeah, I'm quite hopeful that this will finally be done, and if it's done in 2 weeks, then it will be finished before its cast on anniversary, which is September 22nd. So that would be great. If I can say that I definitely finished it within a year, then I will take that as a win. The yarn, by the way, for this is Tin Peer Gint, Sandnes Garn Tin Peer Gint, and Filcolana Avetta. I'll put the Ravelry link for this project so you can find all the information about the yarn colors. But yeah, it's so beautiful. You can really tell I'm into my greens. I think I really like the color green. I think it matches my hair color and my eyes quite well. That's why I gravitate towards these sorts of colors a lot. The next work in progress is a lot less wintry. It's kind of, I think, my last summer project, basically. It's the Tulipan Tee, also by Lynette. I completely forgot to mention that the porcelain sweater is by Lynette Home Samso, Lynette on Instagram. And this is also a pattern by her. So this is the Tulipan Tee, which is one of her series of t-shirts that have these lace round yoke details. I'm knitting this up in Drops Bell in the color Cherry, which is the same color that I used for my ivy top, and it's looking great so far. So the update is that it's quite difficult to see when it's on needles like this, but I finished the lace yoke, and now I'm doing the couple rows of raglan increases that you're supposed to do before you split for body and sleeve. I'm very close to being done with those raglan increases, and then I'll be able to split for body and sleeve, and then it will be a lot easier to see how it looks and how it fits as well. I'm not giving this too much of a priority, this pattern, even though we're getting really close to the end of summer. I reckon that even in autumn I would be able to wear this with a cardigan on top, for example, or whenever I'm going out and stuff like that. And so yeah, I'm not in a big rush to finish this. As I said, I think this is probably going to be my last kind of proper summer project that uses like summery plant-based yarns. Also been giving priority to these projects, so like this jumper, which I finished now, and the porcelain sweater, which I really want to finish before that cast on anniversary. I've just kind of noticed that I actually have quite a few summer tops in my knitted wardrobe, and I feel like I don't have enough knitted jumpers in my knitted wardrobe, so I really want to give those a priority this year. Again, I think this is a topic I could touch on if I were to do an autumn winter knitting plans video. Yeah, maybe I should do one so I can yap about what I want to make in terms of sweaters and cardigans and whatnot. Anyway, and today's third work in progress is these Mystery KAL socks, which this is my first time ever doing a mystery knit along, and it's so much fun. I love this. So this is the mystery knit along that Yucca, the sock pattern designer, has started. By the time this is published, Clue 2's spoiler deadline will be over. That's why I can show these today. And Clue 3 would have come out by the time this is published. And there's 5 clues total. So these are the Clue 2 finished, and I'm doing these socks 2 at a time. It's actually my first time trying that. It's quite fiddly, I'm not gonna lie. So I'm doing this on 80 centimeter circular needles at 2.25 millimeter needles from Chiagu. And I love the process of knitting these socks because the yarn that I'm using is Filcolana Arvetta, which is a very soft merino based sock yarn, and so it's really lovely. It glides super well on these metal needles, but because it's 2 at a time, obviously it's a bit more fiddly. And the sock features these really lovely kind of cables and twists and whatnot, but I found that the pattern, even though they say that the pattern was designed for magic loop method, they don't really tell you how to distribute the needles between your first and your second needle. And you might think, well, surely that's not a problem, you just put half the stitches on one needle and the other half on the other. But actually I found that in the lace, I guess you could call it lace, pattern repeat, some of the knit 3 togethers or things like that, where you definitely need the stitches to be together on the needle, ended up happening at the edge, at the split between your first needle and your second needle, and therefore there was a lot of fiddling around with me having to move the stitches over so that like I could do those knit 3 togethers properly. So yeah, it was a bit of a faff. But the advantage of it being released clue by clue is that there's a real motivation in finishing these clues before the next one is published. So every time a clue comes out on a Friday, I've been able to complete the clue that same day by Friday evening. So this is probably the fastest pair of socks I'm ever gonna knit, or at least the most in time knitted socks for sure. I think it's quite unlikely that these socks end up staying a bit in hibernation mode for a while before I pick them up again, which is usually what happens with a lot of my socks. But these are actually ankle length socks. So technically, I think for my size 2, you only need just over 50 grams of the sock yarn, or rather, I think 240 meters of sock yarn, something like that. I conveniently had quite a bit of this Arvetta yarn left over from when I knitted my friend's cardigan with it, held double. So I had like these 2 leftovers plus a full skein left over. That's what I'm using to knit this up. The color is, I always say Caribbean blue and it's Caribbean sea, or it's the other way around, but the color number is 811. So these are going to be ankle socks, which I've never knitted before, so I'm quite excited to see if that's actually something that I gravitate towards more in my wardrobe compared to my normal crew length socks. We'll see. The pattern is really lovely, very cute, and I think on the picture I saw that it kind of makes a flower shape if you roll the cuff in like this. Let me see if I can make it prettier. Yeah, can you see, sort of? Yeah, you can see the flower shape here. It's so cute, like these 5 petals around. I mean, Yucca is a brilliant pattern maker, and I think this is such a lovely design. So I'm quite excited that the day this video will be published, which is tomorrow, I will get clue 3. So that will be right around the time I need to catch my train. So hopefully I can work on this a bit, as well as work on my next project I'm going to talk about. The last work in progress I wanted to show you is something else that I'm also giving quite a bit of priority on, which is the socks that I'm knitting for my partner. Can't remember if I had finished the first sock in my last episode, but I am already on the second sock. Maybe the last episode I had like this much done on the second sock. I take this whenever I go on the train, and so it's super useful. I get so into the zone. I put on some music on Spotify and I really get into the zone of knitting on these tiny circular needles on these socks whenever I'm traveling on the train. I'm hoping to get quite a lot of progress done on these while I'm on the train up to the north of England to go see my parents, because I think I have about 4 hours of total travel time. That should be quite a lot of time to work on these, and I'm really hoping to finish these before the weather gets properly cold. My partner's birthday is in July, but he was okay with the fact that these weren't finished by then, because he wouldn't be wearing these in the summer anyway, but he was quite keen on having these socks done by the time the weather gets cold so he can have warm feet. The yarn that I'm using here is the colorway by Salt and Sea by the Camel's yarn, and the yarn is, I think, BFL Salt, BFL Twist or something like that. So British Boufflé Leicester. So it feels quite hardy and sturdy in terms of a sock yarn compared to some of the merino sock yarn that I've used before. But yeah, it means it could go through quite a lot of wear without getting too used up. So this was all my works in progress. I do have a few kind of hibernating projects, but I'll mention them when I'm actively working on them. I think that's more productive for these podcast episodes. I don't have any acquisitions to share, but as I was saying, in terms of future plans, let me know if you want to see future plans for autumn winter 2025 video type of thing. I know that they're quite popular whenever we move onto a new season each year. I do have quite a long list on Ravelry of things that I want to knit up, and a lot of them feature cables and textures and stuff like that. So let me know if you want to see a video like that. But otherwise, I'll see you on my next podcast episode. Bye!